those experiences, we learn never to see failure as the opposite of success.
July 2025, Wall Street had seen trillion-dollar companies before. Apple, Microsoft, Saudi Aramco. But nobody expected this. A company that spent decades making graphics cards for gamers had just become one of the most valuable businesses on the planet. For a brief moment, NVIDIA wasn't just leading the AI revolution, it was leading the world. Investors rushed to buy. Governments scrambled to secure AI chips. The biggest tech companies on Earth suddenly depended on a single supplier. But here's what makes this story so unbelievable. Just a few decades earlier, NVIDIA almost didn't survive. One failed product, one wrong decision, one missed deadline, and the company that powers modern artificial intelligence would never have existed. So how did three engineers with an impossible dream build the company that now sits at the center of the AI revolution? To answer that, we need to go back to a time when almost nobody believed NVIDIA had a future. For decades, Silicon Valley has been built on one simple rule. The biggest companies don't stay on top forever. IBM was unstoppable until it wasn't. Intel ruled the computer industry until it didn't. Cisco dominated the internet, then someone else came along. Every generation creates a new giant, and every giant eventually falls. So, when NVIDIA became one of the most valuable companies in history, people naturally asked the same question: how? How does a company go from building gaming hardware to becoming the backbone of artificial intelligence? Because this wasn't luck. It wasn't an accident, and it certainly wasn't inevitable. In fact, there were multiple moments where NVIDIA should have disappeared forever. Most people only know today's NVIDIA, the company worth trillions, the company every AI startup wants to work with, the company that can't manufacture chips fast enough to satisfy demand. But almost nobody remembers the NVIDIA of the 1990s, a tiny startup fighting for survival, burning through cash, competing against companies hundreds of times larger, and making mistakes that nearly killed the business before it even had a chance to grow. This isn't just the story of NVIDIA, it's the story of one decision after another, some brilliant, some incredibly risky, and one gamble that would eventually change the future of technology. But before we get there, we need to meet the man who refused to let the company die. Long before AI, long before trillion-dollar valuations, long before anyone had heard the word GPU, there was a young engineer named Jensen Huang. He wasn't born into Silicon Valley. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't even expected to become one. In fact, his path to building one of the world's most influential companies was anything but predictable. After immigrating from Taiwan, Huang grew up with a relentless belief in one idea: technology rewards the people willing to solve the hardest problems. That mindset would define every major decision he made for the next 3 decades. By the early 1990s, personal computers were becoming more powerful every year. But there was one problem almost nobody was paying attention to: graphics. At the time, computer graphics weren't seen as the future. They were just another feature, something nice to have.
Today, breakthroughs are being made in the art of animation through the use of computers, and a new world of images is taking shape.
Not something worth building an entire company around. Most investors thought the real money was in processors. Companies like Intel were dominating the conversation. Why waste time building chips that only improve visuals? It sounded like a niche, a small market, certainly not the foundation of a global technology empire. But Huang saw something nobody else did. He believed graphics wouldn't stay limited to games forever. As computers became more powerful, visual computing would become essential, not just for entertainment, for science, engineering, medicine, design, design, and, eventually, problems the world hadn't even imagined yet. It was an incredibly bold prediction. The problem? Predictions don't pay salaries. So, in 1993, Huang and two fellow engineers decided to take the biggest risk of their lives. They founded NVIDIA, 3 people, a small office, very little money, and an idea almost everyone underestimated. From day one, the odds were stacked against them. The semiconductor industry was brutal. Developing a single chip could cost millions of dollars. One failed launch could destroy an entire company. And NVIDIA didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. Unfortunately for them, their first years would become a masterclass in exactly that. Because the first products didn't change the industry, they barely survived it. And before long, NVIDIA found itself running out of something every startup fears: time. The first few years were brutal. NVIDIA wasn't changing the industry. It was fighting to stay alive. Every new chip took millions of dollars to design, months of engineering, countless late nights, and there were no guarantees anyone would actually buy it. For a young startup with almost no room for error, that was a dangerous business. Then came their first major setback. The company released one of its earliest graphics chips, and it failed to make the impact they had hoped for. Sales were disappointing. Confidence inside the company began to fade. Outside the company, things looked even worse. NVIDIA wasn't competing against small startups. It was going up against giants, companies with bigger budgets, bigger engineering teams, and far more experience. To most people, NVIDIA looked completely outmatched. Every month that passed, the company's cash reserves kept shrinking. Investors were growing impatient. Employees began wondering if they had bet on the wrong company. And for the first time, Jensen Huang had to face a terrifying possibility. What if everyone else was right? What if graphics really wasn't the future? Most founders would have played it safe. Cut costs, slow development, try to survive. Jensen chose the opposite. He doubled down. Instead of building another average graphics chip, NVIDIA decided to build something dramatically better. It was an enormous gamble. If it worked, the company might survive. If it failed, there probably wouldn't be another chance. Years later, Huang would describe running NVIDIA as living just 30 days away from bankruptcy. Every decision mattered. Every delay mattered. Every mistake could be the one that ended everything. The pressure inside the company became relentless. Engineers worked around the clock. Deadlines became impossible. The team knew exactly what was at stake. This wasn't just another product launch. It was a fight for survival. Then, in 1997, everything changed. NVIDIA introduced a graphics processor called the Riva 128. Unlike many of its earlier products, this one delivered exactly what the market wanted. It was fast, affordable, and most importantly, people actually bought it. In just a matter of months, hundreds of thousands of units were shipped. For the first time, NVIDIA wasn't just surviving. It was proving that its vision might actually work. The company suddenly had something every startup desperately needs: momentum. Money started coming in. Confidence returned. Investors stopped asking whether NVIDIA would survive and started asking how big it could become. But Jensen Huang wasn't celebrating because he knew something most people didn't. Winning once means nothing in the semiconductor industry. You're only as good as your next chip. And while NVIDIA had finally escaped disaster, a much bigger challenge was already approaching. The graphics industry was evolving at an incredible pace. Games were becoming more realistic. Developers wanted more power. Customers expected faster performance every single year. Standing still wasn't an option. So, NVIDIA adopted a philosophy that would eventually define the entire company. Move faster than everyone else. Release better products. Never become comfortable. It sounds obvious today. Back then, it was incredibly risky. Building faster meant making decisions with less certainty. Launching earlier meant accepting more risk. But Jensen believed speed itself could become a competitive advantage. While larger companies spent years perfecting products, NVIDIA kept moving again and again and again. The strategy worked. Throughout the late 1990s, NVIDIA released new generations of graphics processors at an astonishing pace. Each launch strengthened the company's position. Each success brought in more developers, more partners, more customers. Then, in 1999, NVIDIA introduced a product that would change everything: the GeForce 256. The company didn't call it a graphics card. It called it something entirely different: a graphics processing unit, or GPU. At first, the name sounded like marketing, another buzzword, another attempt to stand out. But Jensen Huang believed the GPU wasn't just another graphics chip. He believed it represented an entire entirely new category of computing. At the time, almost nobody understood what that really meant. The GPU was designed to perform thousands of calculations simultaneously, perfect for rendering complex graphics. But graphics weren't the only problems that required massive parallel processing. There were other possibilities: scientific simulations, medical research, physics, artificial intelligence. The problem was, almost nobody was thinking about AI, not yet. And because of that, almost nobody realized NVIDIA had just taken the first step toward becoming the most important company of the AI era. But before the rest of the world would discover the true power of the GPU, NVIDIA would have to survive another challenge, one that nearly every technology company eventually faces: success. Because sometimes your greatest threat isn't failure, it's believing you've already won. By the early 2000s, NVIDIA had done what almost nobody thought was possible. It had survived. The company was growing. Gamers loved its products. Developers trusted its technology. Wall Street was finally paying attention. For most CEOs, that would have been enough. Protect the business, keep selling graphics cards, avoid unnecessary risks. But Jensen Huang wasn't interested in protecting NVIDIA. He wanted to reinvent it again. The problem was, almost nobody could see what he was seeing. At the time, GPUs had one job: render graphics. Nothing more. If you had told investors that one day graphics chips would power medicine, scientific research, self-driving cars, and artificial intelligence, they would have laughed. It sounded ridiculous. But Jensen believed something that would eventually change the entire technology industry. What if GPUs could solve problems that had nothing to do with graphics? It was an expensive question, one that required years of engineering, millions of dollars, and no guarantee of success. Most companies would have ignored the idea. NVIDIA embraced it. Then, in 2006, the company introduced something that looked almost invisible to the outside world. There were no massive headlines, no worldwide celebration, no record-breaking sales, just a new software platform with a simple name: CUDA. For most people, it meant absolutely nothing. But inside NVIDIA, it represented something much bigger. CUDA allowed developers to program GPUs for tasks beyond gaming. Instead of drawing pixels, GPUs could now process enormous amounts of data simultaneously. That changed everything, not overnight, not the following year, but slowly. Researchers around the world started experimenting. Universities began using NVIDIA hardware. Scientists discovered they could complete calculations in hours instead of weeks. Problems that once required expensive supercomputers could suddenly be solved using GPUs quietly. Without attracting much attention, NVIDIA was building an ecosystem. And ecosystems are incredibly difficult to copy. Competitors could build similar chips. They couldn't easily copy the software, or the developer community, or the tools, or the years of accumulated experience. Without realizing it, NVIDIA wasn't just selling hardware anymore. It was creating a platform, and platforms have a habit of becoming monopolies. Still, the biggest breakthrough hadn't arrived, not even close, because while researchers were discovering new uses for GPUs, artificial intelligence was still living in the shadows. Most people saw AI as little more than science fiction, interesting, promising, but decades away from changing the world. Then, everything changed. In 2012, a group of researchers entered an image recognition competition known as ImageNet. They weren't the favorites. Most experts expected another incremental improvement. Instead, they shocked the entire AI community. Their neural network achieved a level of accuracy nobody thought was possible. The model became known as AlexNet, and it had been trained using NVIDIA GPUs. That single moment sent a message through the research world. GPUs weren't just good for graphics. They were astonishingly good at training neural networks. Suddenly, every serious AI researcher wanted access to NVIDIA hardware. Universities bought more GPUs. Research labs bought more GPUs. Tech companies bought more GPUs. And NVIDIA barely noticed what had just happened, at least not at first, because the demand was still relatively small. AI remained a niche field. Few people believed it would become a trillion-dollar industry. But Jensen Huang did. He doubled down again. While many companies chased short-term profits, NVIDIA kept investing in AI, better GPUs, better software, better developer tools, year after year, sometimes spending billions on technologies that generated almost no immediate return. To many investors, it looked wasteful. To Jensen, it was preparation. Years later, he would say something that perfectly captured his philosophy: the more you buy, the more you save. Not because NVIDIA wanted to spend money, because it wanted to be ready before everyone else realized they needed it. That decision would become one of the greatest strategic advantages in modern business history, because when the AI revolution finally arrived, NVIDIA wouldn't have to build the infrastructure. It had already spent nearly 2 decades building it. And then, on November the 30th, 2022, the rest of the world finally caught up. OpenAI released ChatGPT. Within days, millions of people experienced modern AI for the first time. Within months, every major technology company declared AI its highest priority. Within a year, the world entered the biggest technological arms race since the internet. There was just one problem. None of it worked without NVIDIA. And almost overnight, the company that once struggled to survive found itself holding the keys to the most important technology of the 21st century. But becoming essential to the world creates a different kind of danger, one far bigger than bankruptcy. Because once everyone depends on you, everyone also wants to replace you. When ChatGPT exploded, something extraordinary happened. Millions of people were talking about AI, but behind the scenes, the real race had nothing to do with chatbots. It was a race for computing power. Every major technology company suddenly wanted to build larger AI models. OpenAI, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, Tesla, xAI, and dozens of startups you've probably never heard of. They all needed the same thing. Not software, not talent, not even data. They needed GPUs. And there was only one company capable of producing them at the scale the world suddenly demanded. NVIDIA. Demand exploded almost overnight. Orders piled up faster than they could be fulfilled. Companies weren't just buying chips. They were buying years of future production. Entire data centers were being planned around NVIDIA hardware. Governments began investing billions into AI infrastructure. Some even described advanced AI chips as a matter of national security. For the first time in history, graphics processors had become geopolitical assets, and Jensen Huang found himself in a position almost no CEO had ever experienced. The world's biggest companies weren't competing against NVIDIA. They were competing for NVIDIA. Every earnings report shattered expectations. Quarter after quarter, revenue surged. Profits reached levels that seemed almost impossible. The company's market value climbed at breathtaking speed, hundreds of billions, then trillions. What had once looked like an impossible dream was now becoming reality. But success creates attention, and attention creates competition. Today, NVIDIA isn't fighting for survival anymore. It's fighting to stay ahead. AMD is investing aggressively. Intel is trying to rebuild its position. The largest cloud providers are designing their own AI chips. Google has TPUs. Amazon has Trainium. Microsoft is investing in custom silicon. Meta is doing the same. Even OpenAI has reportedly explored building its own hardware, because every company has reached the same conclusion. Depending on a single supplier is dangerous, especially when that supplier sits at the center of the AI economy. History has shown us something important. No technology company stays untouchable forever. IBM learned that lesson. Intel learned it. Cisco learned it. The question now is whether NVIDIA can avoid the same fate, because maintaining dominance is often harder than achieving it. The company now faces challenges that didn't exist 20 years ago. Can it continue innovating fast enough? Can it keep attracting the world's best engineers? Can it defend its software ecosystem? Can CUDA remain the industry's foundation? Or will the next technological revolution come from somewhere else? Nobody knows. But one thing is certain. NVIDIA didn't become the most important company in AI because it got lucky. It became essential because it spent decades solving problems that almost nobody else believed mattered. Long before AI became the biggest story in technology, NVIDIA was quietly building the tools that would make it possible. That may be the biggest lesson in this entire story. The companies that change the world usually begin by solving problems nobody else takes seriously. Think back to the beginning of this documentary. A small startup, 3 engineers, almost no money, competing against giants. One failed product away from disappearing forever. If NVIDIA had played it safe, if Jensen Huang had focused only on gaming, if CUDA had never existed, the AI revolution we know today might look completely different. Sometimes, history isn't shaped by the biggest companies. It's shaped by the companies willing to make the biggest bets. And perhaps that's the real story of NVIDIA. Not that it became one of the most valuable companies in history, but that, for decades, it kept preparing for a future almost nobody else could see. The question now is whether NVIDIA is preparing for the next one, or whether somewhere in a small office, a handful of engineers are already building the technology that will one day replace it. Because if the history of Silicon Valley has taught us anything, it's this. Every giant was once a startup, and every empire eventually faces its greatest test. The only question is, has NVIDIA's test already begun?